everybody, and welcome to the 7th our series of blogs and webinars around the concept of using learning. I'm today, and I am Sharon Young, who is of learning consultant of Pearlcatchers. Today, we're talking about the final pearl, which is around creating an agile learning culture. Challenges with our technology here, but yay, we'll carry on now. So I think most of you that are online today do know me already. So I'm going into too much detail. As you can see from here, I've worked in quite a lot of different areas, and my passion really is about learning, about how we can implement learning to everybody. Today, I'll just ask if you're not speaking at any point, I'll just ask you to mute yourselves in the interim. And if we get to talking at any point, then I can put that back up. But just so we don't get too much background noise from everybody, that would be great. I'm a little bit croaky. I've had a couple of folks today, and I've been doing quite a lot of training, so hopefully it won't distract you too much. We'll be going through this afternoon. Here's an introduction to what we're doing today, and the purpose of the webinar today, and a look at Pearl of Wisdom number 7. So actually all of the other sessions we've looked at one of the sins and then one of the pearls. We've covered off all of the sins now, and this is really where we pull it together in the one thing that's going to really make a fundamental difference to you and to your organisation. We're talking about Pearl of Wisdom number 7, which we said is creating an agile learning culture. Culture is one of those words that means different things to different people. It's really interesting for me to start off and get some interaction from you and ask you what we say that means. If I was going to tell me what is an agile learning culture? What are sort of words that you would use to describe a culture that really embraced learning and had a real agile learning culture? So if you could just type in on your chat box now any thoughts you've got on how you would define what are the sort of things that make up an agile learning culture. People sort of using activities, Mark's saying here, having things that go across different the globe, so that ability to have a culture that is the same regardless of where people are. Being flexibility, people thinking outside of the box, being prepared to try and do things differently. And Mark, absolutely got a key point here where Mark says it's about being quick to change, because in this day and age, this fast increasing organisation and technology that we have in the world today, we have to change quickly as organisations to stay successful. And to change, we need to learn and know that we're changing the right things. That applies to both individuals as well as it does to organisations. So having that culture where you're prepared to learn, see what you're doing well and do more of it, and see what you're not doing so well and what you can learn from it is really important. And certainly, one of the aspects with that is to be using technologies to support that. And so having the right technologies are a structure that supports the underlying culture. That you can have the best technologies in the world. If you don't have the right culture, then they're not going to be utilised. From Patricia, continual development in all ways. So yes, they're looking at all of the different ways of learning, all the different ways. So Pat was thinking here, Darwin came up this week in respect of change. Yes, so Darwin had that idea about it, it not being essential to evolve, but it's not essential to survive either. And as organisations, you do need to change and evolve, and organisations are made up of people, so it's important. So thanks for that there. Some of the things I put down when I was thinking about an agile learning culture, having an organisation that had learned how to learn. And it might be a bit strange But I think we've sometimes forgotten how to learn as people and as organisations. We're so busy on doing the do that we don't sort of have the time to learn. We don't give people opportunity to make mistakes sometimes as part of that learning process. So there's something about actually really learning about how do we learn as individuals and as an organisation, and to be constantly learning about that. And as a result of that, then to be embracing and encouraging all sorts of learning. We've spoken in some of the sessions about using technology, about informal learning, which is where the vast majority of learning comes from. So embracing all of those aspects. Curiosity is really fundamental for me in learning, because you think about children and how curious they are about the world. They absorb things like sponges. We need to get back to that state of being curious about what's going on around us. It's about embedding and creating a culture of agile learning in the organisation, as we said, and how we link that to change, coming back to the point that Mark made as well. Key things for me from that for learning, that everyone has that passion, not just Phil and L&D, not just people in the senior boardrooms. Everybody has a passion for learning. We're constantly learning about learning and how you're learning, how you can improve. Raising the profile and the value of the learning and development, both as a department and an activity. Developing a dynamic learning set. So that's kind of really simple, I guess, when you talk about it from that point of view. But why is it then so challenging for people to do that? I think it's blog, I think in last week's webinar as well, something called the Cultural Web, which is a model which I absolutely love, by a guy called Jerry Johnson. Has anybody heard of that? It's really useful to get a bit of input from those of you online. Has anyone heard of Jerry Johnson's Cultural Web up until now, or is this going to be totally new to you? No, it's new to you. Okay. Anyone else? Mark? Okay. Heard of it. Okay. We've got a bit of a mixture here. I love the Cultural Web is because it's very practical. I don't know about you, but when people first started talking to me about culture, they all sounded a bit airy-fairy and about the artifacts of the organisation, and it was all to do that very touchy-feely stuff in the background. So hard to really get anything I could practically do, and I am a very practical person. And then I came across this model, which is by Jerry Johnson, and it's Jerry with a G and Johnson. I came across it with a colleague of mine who had been involved in a merger that they carried out to form GlaxoSmithKline, which has gone down as one of the most successful mergers ever. One of the big challenges in a lot of mergers is a lot of people associate with the old organisation. So what they did here very cleverly was they asked all of their staff what the organisation to be like. So effectively said, in a year's time, write a postcard if you're writing it to a chief exec and saying, "Dear Eddie, I love working at GSK because," to help them understand sort of what they wanted the culture to be, and use the Cultural Web to implement the culture. So let's talk you through, and most of this session talks you through the culture, which you can use into. So I'll explain basically how it works, and then we'll look at how we can use that particularly to talk about culture. So, is the paradigm. Paradigm is basically that what is different about this organisation? What's it like to work here? So it's almost that summary of your organisation and what it's really about. But the outside are the physical representations of that culture. So I also have a nice little poster somewhere that says that we're this and we're that and we're the other. But in organisational representations don't support what you're saying paradigm is. That's not going to be the paradigm that actually exists. So we can use the model in two ways. We can either assess your culture. To do that, we go around the outside and we look at either 6 different strands and we identify what exists in each of those. From that, you then assess what is the paradigm of what it's like to work in the organisation. Now, you can use it it starts from the inside out. And what do we want that paradigm to be? What do we want to be like? How do we want people to talk about organisation? And therefore, what do we need to have in place in each side to that culture to live? So, it's going to be Mark just said, can you give me an example, please? I certainly will. So an example of an agile learning culture. So let's start from the inside out. Actually, an example that's something I've been working on quite a lot, which is outside of learning, I guess, to degree, but I've been working with a lot of police forces recently. So a paradigm, say, for example, of a police force would be something on the lines that it's very safe, very evidence-based, focused on results and on doing the right thing. So it might be the kind of thing you would have in a paradigm for an organisation. So then you have, if we look at the strands around the outside, you'll have organisational structures. So within a police force, they will be very much based on sort of the role, and they're very geographic. There'll be lots of levels within that, very hierarchical, and the focus on people having very much sort of a going up the line structure as opposed to sort of matrix process management. Structures in something like a police force, you'll have something that's the traditional command and control. People won't really tend to feel empowered to do something outside of the norm. They have policies, they have very tight regulation, very tight measurements. So people will to do what they're told as opposed to what they think is the right thing to do sometimes. I find some departments with that organisation are particularly powerful. So again, within the police force, obviously being the chief constable, etc., there might be certain commands within that. So crime and justice, quite often is seen as being quite a powerful command within that. But it's not always that way. Sometimes in organisations you can have people who are low level but have a lot of influence because people respect them and what they think about things in the organisation. So I've been in many organisations where actually the person who, is a security guard or a receptionist and an awful lot of influence because they speak to everyone and they know better than anyone else what's going on in an organisation. Go to the left-hand side a little bit, we then have control systems and routines and rituals. I tend to go in pairs, all of these things. So routines and rituals are those things that you would expect to happen on a regular basis. Behaviours you would expect to see in people. In a police force, you'd be things like, you would imagine people daily briefings at the beginning of the shift. You would expect for them to be filling out lots of forms when they're taking someone into custody. You would expect them to be out there and being very, very visible on the road. And the control systems are basically your formalised routines. So that's all of the things that the organisation runs. So all of your processes, procedures, all of your measurements, all of your reporting, all of things like your policies, your appraisal system, how you recruit people. Those things are your control systems. They say a lot about how you work. And the more regulated you are, the more focus there is on that. And it's a sort of a terrible example, I guess, in recent years of focusing too much on that would be within the hospitals in Staffordshire, where they're focusing on their measures and doing their measures, and actually as a result of that, people blamed because they weren't focusing on what was really important. So you need to get your control systems right. Final sort of two aspects, one of these strands are my favourites, which are myths and stories and symbols. So your myths and stories are what are the things that people in the organisation and outside of the organisation say about you. You probably remember when you joined an organisation, what kind of stories that you told about what it is to work here, or you don't want to go and upset this person, otherwise you're going to be in their bad book. You don't want to do this. If you get put into that department, that means you're being put out to grass. All of these stories that you're told about an organisation. And the final one are your symbols. So what are things that you say symbolically without actually saying the word? If you're talking about a police force, obviously, all your calls, all your uniforms, stations themselves, all those things give a message. Any posters that you have, seeing people out there for a private organisation, your branding, for example, all of those things are important. And so all these representations of an organisation that in the culture. That's it generically. Move on shortly to talking about that in terms of an agile learning culture. But any particular questions from anyone about the model per se? I've certainly got more information I can send to anyone that's interested. But anyone got any particular questions about that at this point before we move on to look at how we would design using this? I can certainly send extra information out to you, Mark. That's not a problem. I think we've got all your details on file, so I'll make sure that we do that. So, okay, let's talk about this, and that hopefully we'll bring it to life a lot more when we talk about the different things. So let's work from the inside out in terms of talking about an agile learning culture. So if you wanted to create an agile learning culture, what would be the sort of words that you would want to have within the paradigm? Yeah, again, you to put some ideas together. What sort of things that you might want to have? I think for me, I've put a couple of them up earlier on. So, all embraced and encouraged. That would be something that for me would be important to have at the centre of the paradigm as part of an agile learning culture. Any ideas from you guys about what things we put in that central paradigm if we want a truly agile learning culture? Yeah, so appreciating diversity. So diversity. Is that diversity, Mark, in terms of diverse people or diverse methods of learning? So people sort of open equality, continue saying diversity in terms of methods and people. So we're seeing diversity, and actually that's a great way of learning. If we think back to the Pearl when we talked about natural learning, we now learn by being exposed to new things. So the more different people and different types of people we meet, the more that we can learn as part of that. And absolutely, the more diverse methods we have to do that, the better. Probably something around that curiosity and for learning. That for me is quite an important thing to have in the book. And Patricia, she's saying here about equality being important. So I think, okay, so equality of opportunity. I understand what you mean that. So that everyone has got the ability to learn. So it's not just training that's set aside for senior managers or people. It's giving everybody an equal opportunity, no matter what level you're in, no matter what seniority you've got, how much experience you've got, that everybody has that opportunity to learn, and having that sort of excitement. Some of these in turn and see what we think might need to exist in each of these. So if we were looking at an organisational structure, what within the structure do you think would be important to be able to meet that paradigm? So that paradigm where we're actually appreciating diversity, where everyone's got equal opportunity, where we've got that curiosity and passion for learning. What is important within that organisational structure? So the top absolutely is a really good starting point. So I think you need to have the senior managers within that active role models for learning. They are learning, they're accepting their mistakes, they're being open and asking for feedback, and they're supporting learning throughout the organisation, and they can give people time to do the learning. That there is that sort of trust and respect within the organisation. That probably will come to me a little bit more power side of things as well. Some flexibility, being open-minded and having pull effect learning. So for me, I guess there probably would need to be to support that. Mark saying that we want to have that pull effect learning. From a structural point of view, to support that, what you would need to have is a structure and a framework. I think you might have heard it described as a learning state in the past. That supports learning. So there needs to be a way for people to organisation to identify what the learning needs are. There needs to be a process for people to identify what learning opportunities are available, and lots of opportunities, particularly using maybe some of the technology we have today, for people to share information and to find where they get the information or get the people they need to speak to. So absolutely, Mark, as you're saying there, it's about the IT infrastructure. So you need to have the process that people and where they can get information, and then the IT structure to be able to support that. Another area around the organisational structure is where HR and D sit within the organisation. So if they're kind of stuck way down the level, they're not involved at a board level in decisions, etc., then you're going to get that priority. So for me, having someone at the director level, or certainly reporting into that level, where you get that profile for L&D and for HR, really important within the structure of the organisation, that they are seen to be important within the organisation. So that's about the organisational structure. What about the power structures, where power is in the organisation? And this is one area that probably is going to be quite a challenge for a lot of professionals. It links to the last point that I made around to get that profile raised. So within the power structures, in terms of the power and the profile within the organisation, to have truly agile learning culture, you need the HR and L&D teams perceived as having power and credibility within the organisation. That's absolutely essential. If they have that, then the rest of the organisation aren't going to see the need to learn. The other under power structures is around empowerment, and is really where sort of one of the key sort of issues comes with a lot of traditional command and control organisations, that they give lip service, if you like, to say, oh yes, my people can learn, but then they don't give them the time to learn. If they make a mistake when they're trying to learn something, they get reprimanded. So there's about people being truly empowered to learn and try things out in a safe environment, but to try things out and to learn from their mistakes and to be empowered to do that. For me, is a really critical aspect within that. Any other thoughts from you about things that might fit Pearlcatchers? So within not the formal structure, but the more informal relationships between people that would need to exist in the power structures to really make the agile culture work. Any ideas from you guys on that one? Into harder. It's an interesting one, that the power, as I said, that's me. It's the individual, of the L&D team, and I would say actually for me, it's about the managers as well. I think there's something about the line managers. They are very powerful in the learning process. They're to understand their role and the power they play, and whether someone really learns something is really important. So here she's saying about there needs to be an element of creativity, not hitting brick walls from above. So so when people try things out, not kind of getting that pushback all the time from senior managers to say, oh, we can't do that. Yeah, an interesting point from Pat here, that major issue she sees is that HR departments being forced into support the management rather than the people. So I think, in terms of learning, actually the drive needs to come from the people. We need to understand from the senior managers the direct organisation, but it is a really a case of how to people, and the HR and L&D are focused on helping people to get to that stage. To routines and rituals. So if we have got a truly agile learning culture, what sort of things might we have within routines and rituals? So what are the things that we would expect to see? Examples for me is I would expect a routine that people would have some time allocated in their week learning. Routine that when people had a question with something, they felt able to ask other people for help and assistance. The position where they could openly share topics and ideas on subjects and things that they found difficult. Those things that I would think of off the top of my head. You guys, what routines and rituals do you think would need to be in place to really support that agile learning culture? things like one-to-ones. Having one-to-ones about your line manager before you go on any kind of learning intervention, spending some time with an employee to understand from them what they're on the course for, what are their objectives, and then when they come back from the workshop, finding what they learned from it, what opportunities they need to have to practice that, supporting them in that, giving them ongoing coaching. Coaching generally, actually, for me, is probably a really important routine and ritual to have in a truly learning organisation. So Karen's put down here as well, the routine of learning from each other and discuss issues and finding solutions. Generally, we do learn from other people rather than from books, although the internet is fast taking that over these days. We learn so much from just talking. So having opportunities to talk, to share issues, and things like action learning sets are a great way of doing that, where people, they regularly get together and discuss their learning. For those things I just forward, and tips. I'm intrigued. What did you mean by kits, Pat? Team touch meetings. Okay. Yes, very much what we were saying then. So I like that idea. So I've not come across that before, actually, Pat. So do you want to come off mute for a second and just explain what a kit is in your experience?
Hi.
Hello, Pat.
How are you doing? I've broken too badly, so don't worry.
Tell me about kits.
This was something that we created in my long-term employment in recent. And we got, because we decided it was all about keeping in touch. It was keeping communication open, projects with people on, did people have any issues? So we did have weekly kits for teams. And it's them all up, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And in fact, over the years, as I, acronyms are us, as I dealt with departments like Department for Transport and various others, I didn't personally use the word kit. Thinking, what? By the time I'd finished, government had kits, so had the Department for Transport and various other government bodies, because it's friendly.
Yeah, it's something to remember, and I think that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that, Pat. That idea of finding ways to keep in touch by a team or a group of experts, an action learning set, but finding those ways to share those things, and maybe worth sort of adding in sort of a little activity into something where you have a bit of a support challenge, where people say, okay, here's my challenge I've got this week, and got any ideas? And we do a lot of these on some of our learning interventions. Which are aerobics, some of you might have that, where you literally get someone, you've got a team, you've got, say, 10, 12, 20, 30 people, and one person will write down, here's my problem, what do I do about such and such? And you go up with someone, tell them your problem, they give you one solution, and you swap, you give them one solution, and you find someone else. It's very fast moving, but it's a really quick way of sharing information and getting some energy, and getting people to realise they can learn from people. Part of that, sort of getting people to do that, if we do those kind of things, that can help them to get into the routine and realise that if I ask a question, I might get some good ideas back from people. So that's really useful.
I just say, Sharon,
you can.
Something along the lines, the scriptures given about activities was one new manager. She decided we ought to make kits a little bit more fun. What did just within our transport team, one team members would actually lead on the topic for 15 minutes. So it might be our members was an avid cyclist and raced. So he'd tell a story about a latest one. I bring in things like P techniques, language, to try and increase their awareness of BAK language, its communication skills. A learning point as well as the business as well. And that
people get into the habit of learning something, of a short, sharp learning, we can take something practical away and say, oh, I've learned something, rather than having to sit in a course for something they do in half an hour. That's a really good idea. Thank you. So great ideas there for routine rituals. Thank you, Pat, there. So control systems then are the formalised routines. So these are all the kind of things around your performance management. So, for example, for me in an organisation, I had a really agile learning culture. There's nothing with having performance management and an appraisal type process, but the focus would be much more on the development of the person, and they could have stretch targets, how they would be supported in achieving new things, as opposed to quite so much on sort of the measures and the achievement of objectives. It's about how you can constantly learning and improving. So that would be something we'd have in control systems. We would have, I think we've talked on previous sessions about the World Kirkpatrick model, so that would be something that you would use when you're designing any type of change program or any type of learning program. You would have some controls and measures that focus on the rough. So right, as we said back in our first Pearl of Wisdom, it's about starting with the end in mind and making sure that all measures are focused on those. So any of you guys about what might fit into control systems, agile learning culture, what else would you need to have in there to really support learning culture? Any ideas from you? Pat's of ideas is something you just wrote. I don't think you need to. I think after your kit, that's it, Pat. I think that was a brilliant contribution there. Okay, so it's really about, as I said, those looking at all of your. So when you're talking about your policies and your procedures, are they really strict? And how much are they guidelines? So giving people the opportunity within things to have it. These are things that we have got to do, but let's be a little bit clear on these are guidelines, but some of these maybe you can be a bit more flexible on to help you what we need to moving forward. So control systems might include, if you have an e-learning system, your LMS, so your learning management system, that might be able to see what kind of e-learning programs that people have done. Many people have regularly sharing information, what people have been on different programs, how often have people had one-to-ones. So things that actually measure and tell you whether people are learning and improving, and linking those back ultimately to the learning and improvement goals of the organisation, so making sure you have that links, as per the Kirkpatrick model, those links between where we're going as an organisation, how are we learning, what are the behaviours we need, and other interventions we're designing around that. The last sort of the most fun, and I'm just conscious where we are in time, so I won't spend a huge amount of time on it for now, but certainly this is something that we're going to be developing further, and we are going to be ultimately coming up with an online tool and enable you to be assessing your organisation against this. So we're just introducing it as an idea here for today. So I'll talk through these reasonably quickly. Those are, as I said, those symbolic things. So a symbol might be actually that you have awards for the best learner in the organisation. One of the organisations I've worked with has signed up recently to the WOW Awards, and so they just won three because they've got their sort of posters and their awards up. So things that celebrate learning in sort of ways, and that you might have a sort of learning development area where there's this information where you might have sort of spaces for people to come and talk. I remember hearing about a factory where they struggled to get people off of the machines to have a conversation, and they decided they wanted to have a bit like Pat's kit meetings, but they actually said they had hotspot meetings, and they literally painted a huge red spot, an open space in the factory, and literally at a set time of day, everyone would come to that place and they would have a chat about what was going on and share their challenges and share their nation. So that was a very big symbolic aspect that they had within that. And stories might be things that, when someone joins an organisation, they told actually it was really nice, I was tough to try something else. The organisation really sort of took notice of the areas that I was strong in and helped me to those. And they really supported me in those areas that I felt more challenging. So people talking about those kind of things, about being challenged by new things, about learning some new things, about don't worry if you make a mistake, it's fine, we can learn from it. So they're the kind of stories that you might come across. And we'll provide you with more information about that afterwards, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what the culture is. It's a big tool, it is practical, but there's a lot to get over in half an hour, but hopefully we've given you a starting point around where that is. So I just come on to finalising, move forward from this. Any outstanding questions at this point about anything we've covered on the cultural web, particularly with regard to looking at it from the view of creating an agile learning culture, or queries from anyone at this stage? It is great. It is very, very practical. Mark's had a long week. I am with you on that one, Mark. I have to say it's been a very, very long week. So apologies if I'm not my usual sparkling self. This is something to think about and to work on. It is a great tool. It's very practical. So I'll send you the basic information. And what you would do if you were trying to design an agile culture, effectively, you would start from here. You would say, where do we want to be? What are the things that are important for us? Build those things around each of the models. That's what you need to have. Then to the present day and do it round and go outside in. So you go and say, okay, what actually does exist? Are people empowered at the moment? Does ND have sufficient profile? Do we reward people for trying? Do people really have learning conversations or not? And that you come up with what is your current paradigm, what you want it to be, what actually is it. And moving forward, in an exercise that we look at called Stop, Start, Continue, Change, which I'll go very briefly, is you'll literally say, okay, look at where we are and where we need to be. What are we doing now that we need to stop? We need to stop doing to support nature. What are the work? Let's not chuck everything out because we're probably doing some stuff that's good that we want to continue doing. And what are things that we probably need to have? We need to have some kind of performance management, some kind of measure still, but maybe need to change it. And after getting to understand which aspects of your learning culture that are most supportive, and the presentations that are most going to support you moving forward, which are things that you need to change. Oh, this huge topic. Hopefully I've given you some initial tips and texts here today. So I hope, thank you very much for listening. The recording will be available, and if you've got any particular interest in speaking about any more detail, then please do let me know. But very much, it's been great to talk to you, and have a great weekend. Thank you. Goodbye.